Good morning, everybody. I am currently on the backyard of the Bullenhuser Damm School, and this is in an area which is called the Rotenburgsort of Hamburg. And of course, by 1943, Hamburg, as being so close to the coast and easy accessible by bomber planes, this area was largely bombed out, and everything here was heavily damaged. The school had slight damage only to it, but since all the other areas were evacuated, there was no need for using this as a school. And then in October 1944, this was set up as a sub-camp, Außenlager, a satellite camp of Neuengamme. And what they did, of course, as they did in Berlin with Sachsenhausen and many other of the cities that were bombed, they used concentration camp prisoners as workers, mainly to clear the roads and railroads, but also to remove rubble. And of course, Sachsenhausen was very famous for using prisoners for clearing bombs after air raids, and these bombs were 500 and 1,000 kilos bombs. So when they went off, it took off not only the prisoners but everything around them. And of course, this area was set up then as a sub-camp of Neuengamme. When everything collapsed and the evacuation started, this school was evacuated on April 11th, 1945. There were left 2 SS men in charge here to guard the school. Their names were SS Unterscharführer Johann Fram and SS Oberscharführer Ewald Jauch, and a janitor of the school. They were the only one left here, and they were left here to, of course, guard the school. And as I told when I was in Neuengamme, there were experiments conducted on prisoners and also on children. And I will give you the background of the history. The SS doctor Kurt Heismeyer, he was working, and this was the same thing happened with many of the other doctors of the SS system. They were working to get a professorship or in increasing the stature and making medical research that would assist the Nazi regime, of course. And to obtain professorship, he needed to present original research. And his research had so far been disproven. He had the hypothesis that injection of tuberculosis bacteria, bacillia into subject directly into the veins would work as a vaccine. And of course, this didn't work. All the prisoners became very ill, and many of them, of course, died from the experiments. And then there were autopsies were done to see what happened inside the body. This is, of course, known from many of the camps that were used for this. And then, of course, this experiments, most of the experiments done by the Nazi doctors were pseudoscience. It was based on racial beliefs, and it was based on subjecting prisoners into very inhumane research. Some had validity, as of subjecting concentration camp prisoners to icy cold water. This was to see how long Luftwaffe soldiers could survive in cold water. But of course, the subjects didn't do this voluntarily, and of course then the research was invalid. And then, of course, there was a lot of experiments, especially in Sachsenhausen and Auschwitz. They cut open the calves, Ravensbrück as well, cut open the calves and thighs of prisoners, grabbed a handful of gravel, put it into the wound, and then closed the wound to see how this progressed with the infections and everything. And of course, these experiments were done because on the Eastern Front, and of course in the heavy fighting, a lot of soldiers were subjected to heavy wounds that get infected. Of course, cold made people have gangrene and everything. So this was done for the purpose of finding medicine and fast way to help their own soldiers. But of course, again, the experiments were done on unwilling subjects, and there were many of them died a terrible death because of the pain and everything they were subjected to. And those who didn't die, they were killed by a phenol injection, normally to the heart, so that they could do autopsy on them to check the results, of course. And Heismeyer, he was was able to have these facilities because he had very high connections in very high places. His uncle was SS General August Heismeyer, and he was also a close acquaintance with SS General Oswald Pohl. And of course, this made him high up in the hierarchy. He worked together with Josef Mengele in Auschwitz. Of course, everybody, all the doctors that did experiments normally reported back to Mengele, which was the hub of the experiments. And then these experiments were initially conducted with the tuberculosis, were conducted on Soviet prisoners of war and other countries in Neuengamme concentration camp. Then, of course, the Jews became available for experiment and all, and the research were extended into them. And for this, Heismeyer chose to use Jewish children. 20 Jewish children, 10 boys, 10 girls, were especially chosen from Auschwitz by Josef Mengele himself and sent to Neuengamme. And the report says that Josef Mengele asked the children who wants to see their mother, and of course all the children reached their hands in the air, and then of course everybody wanted to see their mother because they were taken from their mothers and probably held at the barracks that Josef Mengele controlled inside Auschwitz. The story doesn't say that. And then the children that were sent, they were ranging from 5 to 10 years old. These children, they were sent from Auschwitz with 4 adult companions. 2 were Polish nurses. One was a Hungarian pharmacist. And when they arrived at Neuengamme, they were immediately killed, of course, because they were Geheimträger, bearer of secret. They knew that these children were sent to Neuengamme to be experimented on, so they were immediately killed. And then, of course, I will read a testimony for you. The transport was accompanied by an SS guard. There were 20 children, 1 female medical doctor, 3 nurses. The transport was in a separate carriage that was coupled onto a normal train. Presented in this manner, it appeared to be an ordinary carriage. We had to take off the Stars of David lest we attract any attention. To prevent people from approaching us, they said it was a transport of people suffering from typhoid fever. The food was excellent. On that journey, we were given chocolate and milk. After a 2-day trip, we arrived at Neuengamme at 10 o'clock at night. Pola Troki. And of course, upon arrival, there is heavy traffic behind here. So this is a very industrial area. Upon arrival in Neuengamme, the children were injected with the tuberculosis bacilli, and all of them became very ill. Heismeyer then had their lymph nodes surgically removed from their armpits, and then he sent them to Dr. Hans Klein at Hohenlychen Hospital for study. All the children were photographed holding up one arm to show the show the surgical incisions. And Dr. Hans Klein, who was the hub of getting all these samples, he was never prosecuted by the system at all. And of course, with the collapse of the front to the east and the evacuation, everything was falling to pieces in Neuengamme. So the children, there are 4 adult caretakers and 6 Soviet prisoners of war, were brought with a truck to the Bullenhuser Damm School, which is behind me here. And the school had then been taken over by the SS to house prisoners from Neuengamme, and their mission was to clear rubble from the surrounding area after the raids. The SS evacuated the building on 11th of April 1945, and leaving a skeleton crew of SS behind only. Edvard Jauch, as I told, and Johan Fram, and the janitor. They were accompanied by 3 SS guards, Dreimann, Speck and Wiehagen, as well as the driver Hans Friedrich Petersen, and an SS physician, which has the impossible name of TRZ-E Binsky, Trzebinski. The children, as well as others, were told they were taken to Theresienstadt. Upon arriving to the school, they were taken to the basement, and according to one of the SS men that gave testimony, the children sat down on benches all around the cellar and was very cheerful and happy to be allowed out of the experiments and taken away from Neuengamme, which for them, of course, was a place of terror. And as the SS guards say, the children were completely unexpected. They were made to undress. Trzebinski injected them with morphine, and the reason, of course, is having them to calm down. Then they were led into, or carried rather, into a adjacent room and hang from hooks on the wall. And the execution was overseen by Obersturmführer Strippel. The first child they hanged sorry, this is shit. This is a bad place. The first child they hang was so light because he was a very young child. So the noose didn't tighten. And then Fram grabbed the child in a bear hug and used all of his force to choke the child with the rope. And this, of course, the children were hanged 2 by 2, and he used his force to hang them. The adults were hanged from overhead pipes. They were made to stand on a box, which were kicked away underneath their feet. And that was it. The bodies were taken to Neuengamme and cremated. The very same night, approximately 28 to 30 Soviet prisoners of war who had been subjected to medical experiments in Neuengamme were led into the same basement and then suffered the same treatment. They were killed by the SS. And of course this was the very end of the war. So this was a house of terror. And then of course this is on the different sites that explains of the Bullenhuser Damm School. It says that this was one of the most terrible actions during the Holocaust, but problem is this was normal. This was the way they treated the children that were experimented on. This was what Mengele did. He had a special interest in twins, and it was perfect because he could inject or subject one of the twins to some kind of disease, or sometimes both. One of them maybe survived, the other one died or got very ill, and then they killed both the twins because it was a fantastic opportunity. Then they could do autopsy on identical twins that died at the same moment, and in medical history that basically never happens, or extremely rare. So they did the autopsies, and of course the results were sent in to the system and stored. After the war, they discovered several of the places. I think even in the 90s, they discovered in the cellar remains from prisoners that were subjected to medical experiments, and of course we also see there, especially in Auschwitz, many of the camps, prisoners that were suffering from any kind of diseases. If there were dwarfs, or they had a special, I don't remember the name, there is a disease that attacks the spine, so that you get a very S-formed spine. And of course these were very interesting for them to experiment on, so they were killed, the flesh was removed, and their skeletons were sent into the system and were found in basements after the war. And of course other skeletons were sent to schools and everything. So the remains of many of those who were experimented on were actually then used, and probably some don't even know where they came from today. So in medical institutions and other places in Germany, there are probably remains of victims of concentration camps that are used still today. And there is actually a debate, because some of the research, as I said, has some kind of validity. So still today, the medical societies of the world are debating if they could use this information that were gathered through these experiments. Personally, nay. And then again, it was coerced, it was forced, and the results can therefore not be valid in the same way as prisoners that are actually volunteering for participating in experiments. But nobody volunteers in experiments that will get you extremely ill, and of course all the experiments the Nazis did were crimes against humanity. I have a list. I am going to read the names of the children that was killed here. Manja Altman, she was 5 years old, from Poland. Leka Birnbaum, 12 years old, from Poland. Sergio De Simone, 7 years old, from Italy. Gold Surchis Inger, 11 years old, from Poland. Rivka Hertzberg, 7 years old, from Poland. Alexander Hornman, 8 years old, from the Netherlands. And his brother Edward Hornman, 12 years old, from the Netherlands. Marek James, 6 years old, from Poland. Junglib, 12 years old, from Yugoslavia. Lea Klugerman, 8 years old, from Poland. George André Kohn, 12 years old, from France. Bluma Meckler, 11 years old, from Poland. Jacqueline Morgenstern, 12 years old, from France. Reichenbaum Edward, 10 years old, from Poland. Marek Steinbaum, 10 years old, from Poland. H. Wasserman, 8 years old, from Poland. Eleonora Witonska, 5 years old, from Poland. Roman Witonski, 7 years old, from Poland. Roman Zeller, 12 years old, from Poland. And Ruchlas Sylberberg, 9 years old, from Poland. So they were not 5 to 10, 5 to 12 years old. And then of course this is one of the worst crimes that the Nazis did when they experimented on young innocent children, and almost nobody were persecuted after the war. Some of them fought the system, some got to live their lives quietly, and then of course in 1964, when they started investigations in Germany itself, I have to read. In 1967, the prosecutor Helmut Munzberg dropped the charges for lack of evidence, stating that Strippel had not acted cruelly, as the children had not been harmed beyond the extinction of their lives. So he was acquitted because he didn't harm. They were killed, the children were murdered, but he hadn't harmed them beyond being murdered. And of course, this is a problem in the system, and people are, many of the SS perpetrators are caught by the system. If they were caught by the Soviets or the Polish or any other and released to them, the punishment often were harsher than when they were captured by or given to the Germans. Of course, very few received the death sentence or any prolonged sentences after the war of the SS. And then of course, one of the physicians, I don't remember, not there, but he was essential in Action T4, and he experimented on brains. And his after the war, he actually released a paper on his studies, which were accepted by the medical society. And of course, then as the Cold War extends or hardens, and the fronts between the West and the East is getting harder, many of the prisoners who were given lifetime sentences were released after only a few years because of a general amnesty brokered between the Allies and the German state, because we needed, as allies, we needed a strong Germany, and this was one of the deals. And of course, the Gestapo, who was behind and responsible for every arrests all over the world, and of course were in place in every camp all over the system. Many of them just changed hats. So on the western side, they went into the secret services because they were trained in this. They had been working as agents since 1933 or even before that, and of course this was a valuable asset to us as the Allies. And the same thing actually happened on the other side of the wall. Into Stasi, quite a few Gestapo members just changed hat and then suddenly were Sieging Heil to the communist instead of Adolf Hitler. So there is a lot of atrocities done, and especially towards children, and there are almost nobody is punished by this. And Strippel himself, he died in May 1994 as a free man. So, and another case was put up on in the 80s, but he was dismissed because he was sick. So this is a terrible place, this school, and of course, many will say, yes, the shadow of Auschwitz it's always there. 250,000 children were murdered in Auschwitz, and children, that was anyone below 15. And we have extreme stories from Otto Moll and other of the SS guards throwing babies into the burning fire or crushing their heads against wagons or side of trucks. And also in Treblinka you have the same. Some SS men obviously enjoyed doing it, and then to save using a bullet, they just threw them on the fire alive. So, as I said, a shadow of Auschwitz, then the number of 20 is not so big if you look at the math of it all. But again, one death. Auschwitz has 1.2 million killed, but every one killed is one name, one person, one family member, one life, one story. So it doesn't matter if it's 250,000 or as here 20. And of course, these children became very sick from the experiments. I hope that the morphine injected made them unconscious of what they were to be. And of course, these deaths were, if you should compare it and be very cynical, dying by a bullet or an ejection was at least quicker than dying in the gas chamber, where it took 10-15 minutes for everybody to die. So this is the Bullenhuser Damm School. It looks like it's a school today. I don't know. I have clamped my camera onto a fence. And there is a museum, by the way, in the cellar, the basement here, but it is only open on Sundays between 10 and 5. I knew this, but I wanted to go here anyway, and I'm leaving for Norway on Sunday, so I will not be able to go here and visit, because I would really like to. There is this is a Gedenkstätte, a memorial for those who were killed here. And then of course, not only the children and the Soviet prisoners of war were killed here during this action, many of the prisoners, of course, who were clearing rubble were mistreated, and if the guards, or some might have tried to escape, but if the guards just wanted to shoot a prisoner, they did so, and it was shooting during an escape. And then of course, this was the end of the war. None of the rules that applied in the 1930s were actually guards could be prosecuted for shooting a prisoner or killing a prisoner unlawfully. Now the gloves were off, the rules were gone a long time ago, so they could basically do whatever they wanted. So not only did these approximately 60 people die on that one of the last days of the war, but many of the prisoners that were forced to do the clearing of the rubble died because of the treatment. And of course, they were malnourished and ill, many of them that were forced to do this work. But as I say, this is a terrible place, it's a terrible history, but there are so many terrible places and terrible histories. But I think it's important. This is why I came here today, and for me, with the children, it's always overpowering. It's emotional. Every time I go to a place like this, my jaw clenches up because I know the story. Today I had to cheat because there are a lot of names that needed to be said, so I had a cheat sheet, but of course I have read about the history, which I always do when I go to new places. Okay, I'm going to walk Hamburg today, so I took a day off going into concentration camps, but I'm still going to visit a few places in Hamburg, which is connected to the Second World War, and show up. And in Hamburg there is a lot of Stolpersteine, stumble stones in the ground, showing the victims of the Nazis. So when you walk in Hamburg, when you walk in Berlin, when you walk in German cities, don't only look up. And you need to look up, because a lot of the buildings are amazing. This is boring because it's a school, so the most amazing part are the figures that are here. But always look up, but always look down also, because you are literally stepping on history. Okay, from Bullenhuser Damm, it's Frank out. Take care.